Hello everyone, and welcome to our continued video on loops. In this video we'll be covering the range function and list comprehensions. So why don't we get started? So when I created a loop on the last video, it looked something like this. For I in range len of breakfast. Right, and the idea that was new is that what the heck is this range keyword or function? Well, range is actually a function, and why don't we use it to print well, actually, let's look at the inputs of how the range function works. So the range function works in three ways, and let me start off with a commented block. So to use the range function, there's actually three ways of using it, and we will see examples on how it's used right after. So first we can use range, and we give it a stopping condition. This is the case for the for loop that you see on line 10 of this program, right? So what this will do is that this will start from 0 and go up until the start condition -1. The next way of using this function is range, same function name, and we give it a start condition and we give it a stop condition. Right, so if we give some intermediate starting condition, it'll begin starting and including the start number up until the end of the stop condition that is given. But it is not inclusive to the stop condition. So if I say 1 through 5, it is inclusive of including the 1, but it is exclusive of including the 5. So we'll get the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. The third way of calling this function is range, and we give it a start condition, we give it a stop condition, and we give it a step. This should look familiar to string slicing, and this is the same format. The step condition shows how much we want to jump from our start and our stop up until our step. So if I give a step of 2 and I wanted to start at 0 and go up until 11, I would get nothing but even numbers. Now, what would happen if we tried to print the range? So print, and we'll do range of 5. Let's see what happens. Range of 0 through 5. So it's implicit that if you only give it a stop condition, the range, the start of our range function is always going to be 0, right? But notice it doesn't print like a list. When we printed it in our for loop, we saw 0 through 4. Or if this was in a for loop, we would see 0 through 4. So why don't we make this a list? Why don't we say A is equal to list range of 5? What'll happen? And what will happen if we print that? Ah, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're looking for. Okay, so why don't we use the second condition? I will say B is equal to list of range, and let's start from 8 up until 17. How about that? We'll print that, and let's see what this produces. Okay, so it starts from 8, and it keeps incrementing upwards by 1 up until 16. Notice how it is not stopping at 17. It stops at 17 minus 1, which is 16. This is how a lot of the methodology, the way of thinking, is implemented in Python. It'll have an inclusive beginning, so it'll include the number that we start at, but an exclusive ending, which will not include the ending condition that we provide. So now let's use step, and let's get a little bit ambiguous with this. We'll say list range of 0, well, 4, and we'll go to, let's say, 25, and we'll have a step of 2. So we'll be incrementing. We will not be including every single element in between this number range, but we'll be skipping every other one. So why don't we print that result? Okay, so because we are skipping every other number, it makes sense that these are even numbers. So this is going according to how, well, we would expect. It's going according to the theory. Right, so this is pretty nice. And this is how the range keyword works, the range function works. So a range is actually a class, and it returns a range class. But when we use it in for loops, we can, or if we cast it as a list, it is used as a list class. So this brings us to our next topic, which is called list comprehensions. List comprehensions are a very Python way, or Pythonic way of doing things, a way of creating lists. So as you know, the expressions on lines 22, 25, and 28, they create lists. This doesn't give us too much control on how we can create the list. Let's say I wanted to have a list from the range of 4 to 25 with every other number being taken, but I wanted to multiply each number by 2. Well, I can't do it with using just the list function. So there is a solution to this. It's called list comprehensions. So why don't we create something like this, the same range, so whatever C is, but every value is going to be multiplied by 2. Well, this is how we do it. We're going to store it in D, and we're going to say I for I times 2 for I in range of 4, 25, and we skip every other one. Right, so this will create a list that's going to be just like C, except every element is going to be multiplied by 2. Why don't we print just to double check our theory? Hey, yeah, this is absolutely correct. So, right, so this is called a list comprehension. It is when you use a for loop just on one line to create an array or create a list of values. And it's similar to how we use the range function and casting it as a list, but for here we have a little bit more control because we're using a combination of a for loop as well as the range function to create a list. Right, and we're able to exercise the control because we can modify I for I in range, right? And we do that by multiplying it by 2. If I'd like to, another way of doing it is, let's use the exponentiation operator. So I'll say J, and we'll square everything. For J squared, J to the power of 2 for J in range. And let's say we'll do 10, 0, minus 2. So we'll get a series of squared numbers, right? The first 10 squared numbers of multiplying 1 times 1, 2 times 2, up until 10 times 10, but we'll get it backwards. So why don't we print E to see that our theory is correct in this. Oh, hey. Okay, this isn't correct because I'm skipping every other one. So I get 10 squared, 8 squared, 6 squared, 4 squared, and 2 squared. If I'd like to get every number, I'd have to do a step of minus 1. And this gets us everything. 10 squared, 9 squared, 8 squared, and so on. So list comprehensions are a pretty neat way of creating lists in a way that gives you a little bit more control than using just the range function. And it's a very Python way of creating lists. But really this does have a lot of utility in creating lists. And in the next video, we'll be covering conditional statements, meaning if, else if, and else. Thank you.